Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MedBoys podcast. Due to all of your requests, today we've brought back Dr. Harsh Parikh. Feel free to check out our previous episode with him if you haven't already. Thank you so much, Harsh, for joining us. And to start off, could you just give us a little bit of an update on what's happened with you over the past year?
Absolutely. So thank you guys for having me again. It's a pleasure to be on the show, I guess. So currently I'm now a PGY1, which means a medical resident in internal medicine program at the University of Toronto. So it's a 3-year program here. So I've started my first year on July 1st of 2021. You can see the degree at the back. So I graduated last year. And have my MD. So it's good. It's first year as an official doctor, but still a resident. So it's going to be a long process overall, but getting started. So looking forward to it. And it's going great so far.
Well, yeah, first, like to say congratulations, Harsh, for all the hard work, man. It's a great accomplishment. And I guess I'd like to start off by asking how the transition was for residency from medical school, and what are some of the differences you saw between the work that you're doing now and some of the work that you did during your clerkship?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think compared to medical school versus now becoming a resident, honestly, it's not too different in terms of your day-to-day work. It's kind of the same thing. But what's really different is the expectations and your responsibilities are the two main things. So first, as a physician, your expectations from staff doctors is that your knowledge base would be significantly higher than that of a medical student. While it's literally just a day that you transition from a med student to a doctor, but that expectation is a lot. So you have to be reading around your cases. You have to at least sound smart, even if you maybe might not know everything. So that, and then your responsibility. So as a physician, you don't no longer have to be co-signed for all of your orders. You're able to make decisions yourself. And a lot of people say like MD itself stands for making decisions. And I think your ability to be decisive and do the right thing for your patient is very important. And that is what differentiates a medical student from a doctor. And you're always trying to make the right decision. Sometimes you may unfortunately end up making the wrong decision, but it's important to prioritize patient care always, and to do the right thing. So that to summarize, it's the increased responsibility and the increased expectations that are quite a big transition. But it's it's on you to keep learning, to keep your responsibility and your care for patients as utmost. So that's what I would say are the biggest differences.
Harsh, that sounds scary, but at the same time very exciting. So it's kind of double meaning there. But how's your daily routine been as an internal medicine resident? So when you wake up, how long do you work for? How much time you're able to get to yourself?
Absolutely. So first of all, internal medicine, it's very broad specialty. Most people who are not in medicine probably would have never heard of it. So just to kind of go, every month we're doing different blocks. So 1 month I'm doing general internal medicine, which is like on the clinical teaching unit on the wards, seeing general medicine cases, and other blocks include cardiology, nephrology, respirology, etc. So I just finished my medical oncology block, and I'll be starting tomorrow a new block, so a new month of nephrology or kidney specialty. So basically every month is going to be different, but from a day-to-day perspective, usually you start at 8 a.m. So you go in, you might have some teaching from like 8 to 9 or something like that. And then you see your patients on the nephrology floor. I'll be seeing patients with kidney disease, some of them on dialysis, some of them quite sick, others are doing well, more outpatient basis. So it'll be a combination, either on the ward as an inpatient in the hospital, or doing more clinic visits where you call them over the phone or you see them in clinic at one of the hospitals. And that generally runs from 8 a.m. to around 6 p.m. And then you come home and you read around cases or you finish up anything you need to do. And you might have other extracurriculars, but hopefully you get some time to relax now that you're a doctor, and you don't have as much on your plate, hopefully, in terms of like always gunning and trying to do more and more. So it's not too bad, but the challenge is call. So you're on call 1 in 4 days. So every fourth day you're on call at a hospital, meaning you're working 26-hour shifts. So you're starting at 8 a.m. in the morning and you're finishing the next day at around 10 a.m. And after that 10 a.m., you do get a post-call day, meaning you get a day off on the next day. But every 4 days, if you're doing those call shifts, that gets really hectic and tiring. So I think, as a resident, you have to do that. And that's what probably differentiates resident from staff the most, is this tiring call and all of that. So that's generally my day-to-day schedule. And that's how I would put it.
Yeah, that all sounds really exhausting, Harsh. And I can see you're probably putting in a lot of hours. And that's the question I want to ask you, is actually very tied with that. It's quite controversial. And do you think that the amount of hours you're putting in as a resident, the amount of effort you're putting in, is fairly compensated through your pay or through the rewards you're getting outside of that? Do you think that is something that is fair?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So on average, we work around 80 hours a week. Obviously, the average hours, 40 hours is, what we say is the usual, but 80 hours, like doing 1 in 4 call. Every other weekend, we're also working. So that like literally takes up a lot of your time. So it averages to 80 hours and we get compensated like 50,000 per year approximately. And then every year, so in PGY1, it's 50,000, and every year it might go up by like a couple thousand here and there. So it's really not compensated well. And I'm still in debt with all of my undergrad and medical school. So I'm still working to pay that off. And I'm living in downtown Toronto, so the rent prices there are quite expensive. There's so many other things. And with a 50K salary, working tirelessly, like it's definitely not compensated well. And I do think that's a global system adjustment that needs to be made. And I think we should advocate for that and continue to push for that. And I do not think it's enough, but comparing to a lot of my friends who are doing other things, engineering or whatever else, they're already working, they're already making money. They've been working since the time I started even medical school or so. So, it's a huge trade-off there. But I think ultimately you're taking care of patients, you're doing something exciting every single day, you're doing what you love. And that satisfaction that I get from medicine, I don't think I would get that in any other career. So ultimately it works out, but I do think that it's something that could and should be increased, the pay.
Definitely, man. Definitely. It's because, doctors are the frontline workers of our healthcare system. They deserve, the amount of compensation that is fair for the amount of work that they're putting in. So it's definitely something that needs to be talked about more within our governments and within our public. And I guess along the same lines, we recognize that medical school can be very, very expensive. In the States, tuition can cost $100,000 a year, and it's the same thing here sometimes in some cases. So in terms of that, I think a lot of medical students would appreciate your insight on how you can finance medical school. So whether that be approaching banks for loans, getting lines of credit, what would be your ideal advice for someone who is trying to finance medical school?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'll just add is that with COVID, actually, we have something called the medical redeployment program, where instead of getting paid the minimal wages that we do, they're allowing us to get paid $50 an hour for extra shifts that we pick up. So that's been possibly a good addition if finances are a big issue for you. It obviously means that you're picking up extra shifts on top of the 80-hour work weeks. You're working even more. So that's definitely, tiring, but you do get paid a little bit more there. And then to address your question about finances, so thankfully, finance versus US, Canadian medical schools are much cheaper than the US. US, like you said, 100K per year approximately. I'm not sure the actual average, but here at U of T was around 30K per year for me. So it's literally very, very minimal compared to the US. I did get into, I'm not sure if this was in the previous podcast, but just I did get into a US medical school. And one of the biggest hindrances of going there was the tuition, 100K per year. Actually, it was more like 130K per year with these private schools. Whereas here it was much cheaper. I live nearby, etc. So you do save a lot there. I think we're already in debt from undergrad as well, whoever is probably applying. And so a lot of people in medical school, including myself, did open up a line of credit. Mine was through Scotiabank. And they give a pretty good amount for that line of credit. Thankfully, I haven't actually had to use that line of credit. So a lot of people open up a line of credit without necessarily using it. And the advantage is you get a student professional line of credit where you get really fancy credit cards that usually people have to pay like $120 annually for, but you get it for free because you have this and you're able to get a lot of benefits from it. And you can certainly use money from that line of credit and the interest rate isn't too bad. So that's certainly one option. Another option is asking your parents for a little bit of financial help. And then once you make good money, once you're practicing as an official physician, you can pay them back. So those are the two biggest options: the line of credit from the bank, getting some support there, applying for scholarships and bursaries. If you're specifically like very, coming from a low socioeconomic background, there are certain scholarships and bursaries that you can apply for uoft. When you get into the uoft program, initially they have like various different options. So for every school, I'm sure it's the same, that there are options, especially if you cannot make ends meet, if your family is not doing well overall. So I think putting everything together, there are various options. Going from the bank, going from your family are probably the two most common. And once you're making good money as a staff physician, you can probably easily pay off all of your loans. Obviously, last thing is OSAP, of course. As a medical student, you do have OSAP, and if you're from Ontario, or other student loan programs if you're outside of Ontario. Sorry, that was kind of all over the place, but I'm forgetting now. But finally, the last thing to say is that as a resident, you don't have more loans. This is a big question. Like you do get paid $50,000, but you don't have any additional loans that are accruing. So if you're, able to have a surplus of money, then you can certainly start to pay off some of your loans as a resident. Thank
you, Harsh. This is certainly very helpful. Moving away from money and thinking about financial stress, I am kind of curious. You picked internal medicine. You matched with internal medicine. Congratulations once again. But you did a bachelor's in neuroscience at the University of Toronto, and you went with internal medicine. So I'm curious why you picked internal medicine over the others.
So absolutely, I did a background in neuroscience, and that's where I did my BSc. I did specialize in neuroscience just because I was taking majority of my courses there. It wasn't like I was gung-ho bound towards neurology. I did keep a full open mind when I went through medical school. I ended up ultimately choosing internal medicine for various reasons. I did feel that the fundamental, the pathophysiology that you get in internal medicine, you really get to go into the detail of how all of the different organ systems in your body work. And so that's what I really, really enjoyed. And that's why I went into internal medicine. I also enjoyed emergency medicine, where you were doing and seeing a lot of general medicine as well. So I think for me, those two were probably at the top. You got to see sick patients, you got to take care of them. Surgery was certainly a consideration, but for me, I wanted a good work-life balance, in the sense that I didn't want to be too busy. Ultimately, in the residency training for surgery is also quite long. And so ultimately, taking everything into consideration, I decided on internal medicine, and I'm certainly very happy with my decision. One thing to consider with internal medicine is that after 3 years, of internal medicine, you have to apply again to a subspecialty if you are interested in that. So that's something I'll have to do. I'm thinking potentially cardiology, but I also enjoy general internal medicine. So I between those two for now, but certainly still keeping an open mind. So that's where I'm leaning, and that's why I've chosen internal medicine.
Yeah, that really, it's really good that you brought that logic to us, and that it really looks like the house MD kind of specialty that you're looking at, where you just look at anything and you know what's wrong. I think that's very good. And what a lot of people ask us, especially in our videos, is study techniques, productivity techniques. And since you've gone through med school and we know the awards you have already from your academic achievements, we wanted to ask you how you actually study throughout medical school.
Yeah, no, I think study techniques is certainly something that I've changed throughout the years. I've honed, made better. And I think it ultimately comes down to focus and being able to improve that focus. I always find myself getting distracted by various things, whether it's my phone, different distractions. And I think I always look up videos on YouTube, how to improve your ability to focus. And I think it's something that is very important and needed to, study well. Some things that I do, so meditation, like in the long term, meditation certainly helps to clear your mind and be able to focus on one thing. So certainly try that. I look, there's different types of music available on YouTube, of course, where you're able to find something that helps. There's actually something that I really discovered more recently, is more an upbeat type of playlist. So a lot of the music that I listen to on YouTube is quite boring, and it actually puts me to sleep. So I actually discovered newly like this high tech type of techno video playlist where they actually have upbeat music, and that helps me focus a little bit better. So that's something that I would recommend. Other study strategies is to not fall behind. So a lot of times we procrastinate, and I do it myself a lot too. But if you try to study a little bit every single day, that will certainly help you out tremendously. So I would say try to, during pre-clerkship, after you come home from a long day, or even during clerkship, try to spend at least a few hours trying to study a little bit every single day. And I think that will go a long way. Always take time to always take breaks as well. Take time to talk to your friends, your family, or watch videos, or do whatever you enjoy, going on Reddit or watching YouTube videos, whatever it might be. Make sure you do that, but at the same time, try to study a little bit every day. So I think to summarize those two things is trying to be able to focus on one thing, close your distractions, put your phone to the side and say, I'm going to study dedicated from this time to this time. So really doing that, whatever helps, whether it's meditation or putting on some high-speed sound to help you do that. And the second is taking breaks and trying to study a little bit every single day.
And Harsh, I think a lot of what you said really does resonate with a lot of people. I know a lot of people sometimes don't take breaks and study in like long stretches, or sometimes even myself, I have a lot of problems focusing and not getting distracted. So I definitely understand what you're saying there. So thank you for that advice. And I guess in terms of, looking back on medical school and looking back on what you've learned, the different study techniques, the different pieces of advice that you've gathered from different people, what is something that you would tell someone that is in their first year of medical school currently, that is looking to do well in medical school, looking to succeed? What piece of advice would you consider giving them?
So the advice I would give a medical student who just got into medical school and is trying to do well throughout the 4 years is to take the first 2 years to learn everything you can through the pre-clerkship curriculum, and to really take the time to see what you're interested in. And I would say if you already have an idea of what you want to do, and you're gung-ho about it, do shadowing to make sure that's something that you want to do. Like email certain professionals who are in that field already, take some time to see what their clinic is like, see what their hospital-based ward practice is like, and see if that's something you want to do. If you're not sure, then I would recommend that, let's say you're interested in 2 or 3 specialties to begin with, then try to go for the one that's the most competitive. Okay, try to tailor your extracurricular activities towards that most competitive specialty. So in the worst case scenario, let's say you don't end up wanting that, you're at least you're able to go to one of the other specialties that are less competitive, but it's much easier to tailor your application and go from wanting something super competitive to not wanting something competitive, like whatever that might be. But if it's the other way around, where you're kind of relaxed and not doing trying to set yourself towards the most competitive specialty, and then in your 3rd or 4th year of medical school you decide, you know what, I want to choose the most competitive, like plastic surgery or something, it's going to be too late by that point. So I would say right from the very get-go, try to put yourself ready to do the most competitive specialty that you're kind of considering. But also at the same time, take the time to experience medical school to its fullest. So the first 2 years of pre-clerkship is when you're learning in the classroom, and make the most of that. Go to your lectures, try to study a little bit every day is my general advice. You'll have anatomy labs as well, which sometimes can be, if you haven't taken anatomy like me, that was the most challenging, I would say. So spend some time reviewing that and making sure you know it well. And during your last 2 years of clerkship, really try to experience all of the different specialties. And, even if you don't end up choosing one of those specialties, those 6 to 8 weeks of that specialty will be the only time you will ever be able to experience that. For example, like OBGYN, obstetrics and gynecology, it was really exciting to be able to deliver babies. And that's the only time I will ever get in my whole life to do that. And so if I'm, trying to being lazy and I know I don't really want to do it, I'm just going to, try to stay in the call room the whole time and not be involved, then it's only going to hurt me and take away from my experience. So even if it's something that you don't like, try to experience all of medical school. So to summarize that answer is, try to experience all the different aspects of medical school, learn a little bit every day and try to stay on top of it. And the second is, if you're interested in multiple things, go hard on the most competitive things, so that in case you do end up wanting it, you're ready for that. And to overall just enjoy the experience. Honestly, medical school, you've made it so far already. The hardest step, I would say, is actually getting into medical school. And so take that time to also enjoy the time that you're there and not be super stressed out. And I think the Canadian medical school system actually allows for that, whereas certain other medical programs actually make it so cutthroat that you have to do exceedingly well. It's not a pass-fail system. You want to rank the highest. And so it creates a lot of stress, but the Canadian system doesn't. And so I really do think that your experience will be great if you're in the Canadian system, or otherwise. I think ultimately it'll be fine, but that's just some of the pros of U of T in the Canadian system in general.
Thank you, Harsh. That's great advice. So if you look at medical school back in hindsight, what do you think would be your most stressful moment? Just bringing it down to one specific moment. What do you think was your most stressful moment in medical school?
Yeah. So one moment definitely sticks out the most. And I think that was my summer of second year. So right before third year. Yeah. And the reason was because I was studying for my USMLE Step 1 exam while also doing research. And, I was trying to, basically, I'm in the Canadian medical system already, but I do have family in the US as well. And so I was just trying to keep my options open and potentially applying to the US for residency as well versus Canada. So I was kind of considering both. but I realized the hard way that both the Canadian and US medical school systems are very, very different. So the Canadian system in general is now leaning towards less basic sciences approach and more clinical approach to pre-clerkship. So the first 2 years, you're not going to be learning the pathophysiology, the histology, the anatomy in as much detail. And like the basic science, like the Krebs cycle, et cetera. But in the US, your first 2 years are geared all towards that. And so when you're studying for the USMLE Step 1 exam, they're basically asking you questions about that very, very specific things that we never learned in the Canadian system. So it was a 2-month summer. And in those 2 months, I was trying to cram everything related to that while also making myself a good applicant for Canada by doing research, doing extracurriculars. So it was that stress of trying to be competitive in both Canada and the US, which I thought was a very, very stressful summer. And I was definitely burnt out by the end of that summer. Because I was literally in the library trying to study all day and then coming home trying to do research as well. 2 or 3 days out of the week, I was going to St. Michael's Hospital to do my research. And honestly, it was quite stressful. I did take the last week off just to kind of make sure I had enough time to get ready for clerkship, and I had some time to de-stress. So overall, it was okay, but that's by far the most stressful situation. Ultimately, I ended up passing the exam. Things ended up okay, and I'm here now at uoft internal medicine program. So things are good, but that would definitely stand out as the most stressful situation.
Yeah, that sounds like the MCAT on steroids and way worse. And since we have so many pre-meds watching our channel, Harsh, they would kill us if we didn't ask you this. So we know you were a uoft Med file reviewer, and we wanted to ask you, what do you think stood out to you the most when you look at an application? Because you'd have to look through so many. What was that one thing that really jumped out to you that helped get people in?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I would say there were very few applications where one thing jumped out to me and said, this is the one. If you had something extraordinary, like some very unique award or like crazy amount of publications, or you have a PhD already, or something very, very, very unique, then sure. But for me, what really stood out is or what made you get in is your all-roundedness. Okay, your ability to excel in school, get a lot of good awards, to also be able to do extracurricular activities like research and teaching and do some things that you like. It doesn't have to be one thing in particular. Let's say you really like chemistry and you're gearing your extracurriculars towards that. Sure, that's totally cool too. At the same time, you have a life outside, and you like music or whatever your hobbies are, you also try to excel in that. And so that type of all-rounded personality really makes you stand out and ultimately helps you be selected. And I think out of all of that, the biggest thing is being able to put that on paper, to sell yourself on paper is the very most important thing that sets people aside. Like two people could have done the exact same activities, but if one presents themselves on paper and actually describes it very eloquently, then I read that and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I could read the same activity described by somebody else and be like, okay, sure. So you really have to be able to put yourself out there and sell yourself. That's what the application is all about, is selling yourself and making sure that other people are able to see it. And if you need to, exaggerate just a little bit to be able to showcase that, I think that's totally reasonable, and you should.
To be honest, it sounds exactly like what you would do for a job interview and what you would write on your resume. It's kind of just like making sure you're the best possible person. You're showcasing that to your employers just to land the job, as if you're applying to medical schools. But I guess another question that a lot of pre-meds have about the application process is research itself. I know you talked a little bit about research in our previous podcast, but I'd like to touch on the subject of undergrad journal publications. So it's basically you're not actually working with a professor. It's more so you submitting your publication to an undergraduate journal. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that. A lot of people have been saying it's not as valuable as a regular research publication. So it's not actually worth putting on your medical school application. So what do you think about that?
I respectfully disagree with that. I think you should absolutely put that on your application. I think any opportunity that you get to, first of all, it really improves your writing skills. And I think that is something that you will need eventually. So that's really great for your self-development. And second, I think it shows that you're taking the initiative, you're finding something that you want to write about, that you're passionate about, and you're submitting it and it being accepted, and you being able to get that independent publication of your own is actually great. Ultimately, when you know, let's say you're a physician and you have your own lab and you're asking your own questions, starting your own research projects, it's basically the same thing, taking initiative to do your own project by yourself. And that's basically what you're doing in these types of publications, right? You're choosing something that's important to you, and you're submitting it and you're writing it. And I think it's totally valuable. Yes, it's not probably held at the same value as doing like a primary research paper, but it's certainly worth putting in your application. It's certainly a publication of its own, and any opportunity you get to showcase your extracurricular activities, you should certainly do. For example, I am involved with COVID-19 Made Simple, and one thing that we did was we submitted blog posts and in different locations. There's certain programs that you can find online, certain initiatives, and you can submit different types of blog posts, and even that could be considered a publication. So I certainly put that in my application too. So you should take every opportunity you get, and you can use that as a publication for sure, and include it in your application and use it proudly.
Thank you, Rush. Yeah, like Rushil said, we've heard this a lot. A lot of people come up to us and tell us that I didn't end up putting an undergraduate journal publication into my application just because I heard that it's looked down upon or something. But we think that if there's any kind of research that you could put in, it's helpful. But yeah, just moving into the future now. What are your thoughts on something like physician burnout? Physicians having too much work, and what do you think is like one thing that you could change in the medical system right now in Canada?
So I think physician burnout is absolutely very real. It's something that we kind of briefly touched on. I think it happens more in residency than anything. Hopefully, as a physician, I mean, sure, it'll probably happen to some degree as a staff too, but I think it's probably worse as a resident. You're in training for so long. It's the most lengthy training out of anything. 4 years of undergrad, approximately. Some people do masters even, and other gap years. But ultimately you get into medical school, that's another 4 years. Residency is anywhere between 2 to 6 years. And then people do fellowships for another few years. And then sometimes even further fellowships. And ultimately you start working sometimes at the age of 40. So that's the first time you have an official job. Your friends who started at the same time as you, let's say they're working since the age of even 23, 25-ish. And they're making a lot of money. So I think physician burnout is definitely a thing. You're working so hard in your prime time, your late 20s and early 30s, when you could be out living life in different ways. So I do think physician burnout is a thing. I would say in order to prevent yourself from being burnt out is to not have so many unrealistic expectations and to put too much on your plate, and to take time to take breaks. For me in residency right now, we get 4 weeks total out of the year of vacation. And I always make sure during that time, I'm not in Toronto at all. Like, you won't see me. I'm somewhere else in the world trying to travel to explore another continent. and see what life is like outside and make the most of it. With the pandemic, obviously it's been a little bit more challenging, but I would certainly recommend that. Do your hobbies and make sure you do what you enjoy to prevent that. I think as a global system, we kind of spoke about how residency, the environment of 80-hour work weeks and working every other weekend, it certainly takes away from a lot of it. And so that needs to be addressed. The pay can certainly be increased, and that can be done more on a government stage, on a higher level. So that's in the long term, but I think, always find time for yourself. What makes you happy, prioritize that, because at the end of the day, you being a doctor, you're caring for other people, but you won't be able to care for others if you're not able to care for yourself first. So make sure that you're doing everything you can to prioritize your happiness. And then, of course, keep working hard, because ultimately it's your hard work that will get you to your end destination. So work hard. So that something that I always remember: work hard, play hard. It's very common, but it's so important. When you're focused completely and you're working, put all your distractions away and work incredibly hard and get to your ultimate goal. But when you're having fun, just put everything aside, just don't stress, and just have the time of your life. And if you're able to do both wholeheartedly, then hopefully it'll prevent burnout.
And with those wonderful words of inspiration from Harsh, that marks the end of our podcast. Even if you're outside of the field of medicine, I think all the information in this podcast is going to be super helpful for you. But more importantly, if you are in medicine, of course, this information is absolutely invaluable. So thank you very much, Harsh, for sharing your experiences and talking a lot about your experiences. And we hope to see you guys next time on the MedBoys podcast.